Hey, HTDA, and today we are finally going to do what this game is all about, and that is building a Dyson Sphere, because as you can see we have a nice little sun over there, but there's nothing floating around it. We also have quite a bit of space left on this planet, and I intend to fill it up completely, so let's get to it. I'll be using the same modular layout that you've seen through this entire series by now, and the idea is still the same. So for example over here, well, in order to make a Dyson Swarm we're going to need a lot of solder cells, and this build does exactly that. So again, I'm using most of the base materials like the ingots as a raw material, just smelt them somewhere, anywhere. Most of that is actually being done on this planet itself. And then everything else that we need to make is being made within the build itself. So we need some glass in order to make prisms, we need prisms in order to make these photon combiners, and then we just need to add some circuit boards to that, and you have all the materials you need to make these solar cells, with the exception of the graphene, but I'm using graphene as a raw material as well. Remember, graphene you can make from the rare materials, so it means that all you need to do is transform that rare material into the graphene, and that basically means you should have more or less an infinite supply of that by now, because of course we just had access to warpers in the last episode. So if you haven't actually gotten access to graphene yet, that's probably next on your list. And if, like me, you were wondering why I wasn't getting the graphene, because we did build this nice little build here to transform those rare materials into the graphene over here, the problem is I'm actually not using enough hydrogen. So if we look into this ILS over here, as you can see, we have hydrogen sitting in here, but we're not spending enough hydrogen. But luckily, the next build up is going to solve that problem, because it has been long overdue to actually build some fuel rods, because so far I've still been running on graphite as my fuel. But luckily now we no longer have to do that. These fuel rods will last way longer than any other fuel on, except for antimatter of course, but that's kind of overkill honestly. The main benefit of these fuel rods being is that this will actually consume quite a bit of deuterium, which means we can use that hydrogen to be turned into deuterium in the fractionator, and that means that anything that is potentially bottlenecked by the hydrogen, for example the build that I just showed you, will now be running indefinitely. This is also a perfectly valid way to actually power your mining planets. It's really easy to just dump a couple of these fusion plants on there, so there's a lot of reasons you should make one or two of these builds. Actually, I already made two, as you can see over here. But it's a really easy build to just put down pretty much on any planet, get in the deuterium as well as the other materials, and then just start producing some more fuel rods. Speaking of fusion plants, add them to the mall as well, just to make sure you can get some in production. And then I recommend at this point you add in pretty much any other building that you might need for the remainder of the game. So I have the railguns over here in order to launch our solar cells. I have the large miner over here. I also have the collector, so we can actually get that power from our Dyson Sphere or the antimatter from that, as well as the rocket launchers over here. Now you might need to build in a couple of these distributors in order to make sure you get the required materials. Specifically, the previous build that I just showed you, or at least the first build that I showed you, is also producing some photon combiners, and you need those in order to get the collectors up and running. And as a special note, remember that the large miners actually need the optical grading crystal. That's a rare resource, so the first thing you should do once you leave your system is find a planet that has this, mine it, bring it back to your planet. It doesn't even have to be a lot, just get it going and make sure that you start producing these large miners, because that will make your life a lot easier while you're expanding. Now, before you bother with things like rockets and silos and things like that, that'll actually cost a lot of materials to make, I recommend just putting down maybe a nice little circle like I have done over here around my science dome of these railguns. Add your sails to that and just get them fired up in the air. You actually get a fairly decent amount of power from that, so I recommend putting your array receivers mostly to power generation, but maybe like 6 or 7, put those to photon generation as soon as you unlock the technology. I don't actually have it yet, as you can see I've queued it up, but actually the power generation is really nice as well. You don't necessarily need a sphere, although the game is called Dyson Sphere Program and not Dyson Swarm Program. But if you just want to get the mission complete screen, then all you need really is a Dyson Swarm. Now, at this point in the game, it's basically about getting more of everything. So in order to do all of that, you're going to need a lot of resources. In order to get a lot of resources easily up and running, I recommend bringing a couple of stacks of these wireless power towers with you. It's a lot easier to get a mining plant completely powered up as you're exploring it by using these towers than it is with the smaller ones, because these have a lot larger range. Now, it's really tempting to completely overdo it on your first few trips outside of your own system and kind of want to mine out complete planets at the same time. If you want to do that, that's fine. But actually, it's more efficient to just set up a tiny little mining colony like I've done over here in the one planet that I had close nearby with the optical grading crystal. Put some miners on that, get it going, and just place some solar panels to go along with that, or wind turbines, or whatever happens to fuel your planet. You don't need to get all fancy about this. You don't need to have entire rings around planets like I used to do myself, by the way. Nope. Just a couple of solar panels, get it going, because especially these rare resources, you don't necessarily need thousands upon thousands of that. You will need that eventually, but on your first trip, just get it going, especially the optical grading crystal, so you can get those miners up and running. And as you get more and more resources and you scale up, then you can be a little bit more aggressive about completely mining an entire planet. After you get your optical grading crystal up and running, I recommend going to a planet that has well, a decent amount of iron, silicon, as well as ideally a acid lake or two as well. As you can see over here, this means I'm getting sulfuric acid in huge amounts. Again, just with a very simple layout in terms of some solar panels to connect things from A to B. And this just makes our lives so much easier. As you can see, even though this is just a tiny mining facility, the amount of acid coming in here is huge, and the silicon ore and iron ore is just a bonus to go along with it. For very similar reasons, the next on your list should be a mining machine or two connected to organic crystals. This is really annoying to make in the natural way, and again, it's a rare resource. You can just get it straight from a couple of planets, and then you get more than you're ever going to need. Typically on the same planets you'll also find oil, so might as well just connect some of those as well. Get some coal up and running if you want, and again, if you find any silicon and iron ore and you happen to have that close by, might as well mine that as well. But don't overdo it, just get it going first, because the whole trick in scaling, I'll repeat it again, is just taking small steps, incrementally scaling, making sure you're actually using those resources, and then expanding further. Which also means that now is a very good moment to start upgrading those basic facilities that we've already put on the planet like 2 or 3 episodes ago, but just expand them using the blueprints that we designed earlier on. Again, just a little bit of everything, just to make sure that we have all the base production going. We are actually optimizing those processor builds, quantum processor builds and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense to add more endgame buildings if you don't have the raw resources to actually supply them with. So remember that build that we did last time where we had the Casimir crystals and we deleted most of the buildings that were actually producing those Casimir crystals? Well, now is the time, once you have your basics under control, to make the build another time and then just make a whole lot of Casimir crystals. You can't make enough of these, you're going to need quite a lot of those. I actually don't recommend filling in this building. Why? Because this build is actually also making your titanium crystals. You need those for a decent speed of yellow science as well as some other things. So you might as well just keep this facility as is and then use the second facility to mostly make your Casimir crystals. Because remember, we're being lazy and, well, not lazy, but at least efficient, and we're trying to make this as easy as we can in order to make everything modular and make it easy to expand, and that's exactly what this build is doing as well. I'm once again just making some stone as well as glass in this particular build. The stone is only mostly used to actually make some stone because I hadn't made really any build that actually produce stone, so might as well make this build do that. The glass is meant to make titanium glass, and the titanium glass is then used to make the planar filters, and of course those need the Casimir crystals. Again, you need a lot of these planar filters, and that's the reason you also need a lot of the Casimir crystals. This is not only a tiny bit of production, we're definitely going to have to scale it up in a bit, but for now this will do. Again, you just get it going so you can start out on producing all the later items. Now, if it feels like we're backtracking a little bit to the previous episode, that's actually correct, because all you're doing in this phase is optimizing for the things that you need the most. In this case, the quantum chips that we again, just got going in the previous episode. Somebody should count how many times I've said that this episode already in this entire series combined, but it is definitely true. We just got this going in the previous episode, but now we want to optimize this production, because as you can see, we have plenty of processors. I initially set this to 10,000, so yeah, a little bit more than we actually need, but the major bottleneck are the plane filters, so that is why we're adding in more of those now. Now, don't overdo this, don't go building this build like 10 times over or something like that. That's just complete overkill. Just add in a couple and then see what else you need in order to optimize that. And if you have never seen the end game of Dyson Sphere Program and you for some reason just watching this episode, as you can see, this game is beautiful. I always keep being stunned by the amazing visuals in the end game, and that's definitely worth playing. Oh look, it's the other planet with all the ships flying to that. Yeah, I can just look at this forever. But let's not do this, let's actually get a Dyson Sphere here as well. Now, in order to build that Dyson Sphere, we're going to need a lot of resources, so at this point I highly recommend that you build a supply mall if you haven't done so yet. Now, I have this entire North Pole free. We built the science thing on the South Pole, so this is where my mall is going to be. And for those of you who watch my masterclass series, you'll be very familiar with how that looks, which is something like this. It's basically just a collection of ILSs centered around the pole, with these small logistics distributors connecting to every single building in the game, connected to the ILSs. I actually left a couple of ILSs open because there's more ILSs than we have buildings in the game so far. So there's about 3 of those still empty that I can utilize towards the new buildings that we're probably going to get in the combat update. So this supply mall is already good to go for the combat update as well. Now, pretty much everything else that you might ever want is going to be in here. It's set to local demand, but of course to remote supply. This is why it's a supply mall. So that means that I can now request all these buildings from wherever I want in the entire universe. Now, of course, that does mean that we're going to need to have space warpers added to that. And even though it shows a 0, if you can see this 0 flickering, you have to pay very careful attention to that. As you can see, there's actually a belt with warpers running all the way around, which means that there's now warpers in every single one of these. So if there's ever a ship that needs to fly over, it will actually get that, assuming that there's actually ships in here, and you will be able to request that from wherever in the universe. Speaking of drones, oh my dear lord. Yeah, the drones are working like intended. I really like, once again, a lot of how we have the balance between the ILSs, PLSs, belts, and drones going on. These drones are just delivering things from and to the distributors, and those distributors are only meant to produce buildings. So this is just the entire mall kicking into gear here, because all those buildings are now being transported to the mall. That also means that your personal supply on the mall planet might be cut off for a moment, because the drones will likely be transporting all the supply of buildings to the ILS, but not from the ILS to Icarus, at least not automated. Of course, you can just zoom out, click on any ILS that you want, and just get it straight from the ILS and put it in your inventory. So that's not the biggest deal in the world. Just make sure that you set the supply just to a small amount on these things, so you'll actually get a buffer in the logistic distributors as well, so that as soon as you land on your mall planet, the robots will automatically start resupplying you by themselves. Now, at this point, I still wasn't getting enough quantum processors, so I decided to make a dedicated build. So all I'm doing over here is making the titanium crystals straight from the raw resources, because we now have access to the organic crystals. Making some Casimir crystals on top of that, and then the planar filters. You need about twice as many buildings making planar filters as you need the quantum processors. And all of that should make sure that we are now getting even more quantum processors up and running. Again, you mostly need those for the advanced buildings, but also for the green science. And you also need green science to make warpers. So again, it's the main focus of the expansion at this point. Now, the second reason I wanted that build for the quantum processors is because you can easily add in a small little addition to that in a second build, because you do need the quantum processors themselves as well, but you need them for the rockets. So all I did was make that build again, then add in another ILS that's actually requesting some of the other resources that you need, so the frame materials as well as the solar cells,
as well as the deuterium fuel rods that we are already mass producing now as well. And that means you are now ready to build the Dyson Sphere components, which then get transformed into the small carrier rockets. Now, as you can see over here, you need quite a few of those Dyson Sphere components buildings, and then a small little row of rocket builders will just do the trick. And you're going to need some processors for all of that as well. And even though you saw me stockpiling massive amounts of processors, it's very easy to figure out that you build all of this and then you run out of processors again, because aside from turbines, processors are used in pretty much everything. So it doesn't hurt to add in another copy of the processor build next to that. And then I would recommend just connecting that with a belt like I've done over here, just to make sure that these processors are actually going towards the production of your rockets. At this point, the planet is filling up quite nicely with production, and I want to briefly talk about proliferation, because I haven't been proliferating anything, as you can see, and it would be fairly easy to do so. I've designed my builds in such a way that if I want, I can easily add in some proliferation lines, maybe here and here, things like that, and I would actually be able to benefit from that. The reason I'm not doing that is because in the combat update, I'm not entirely sure if I want to initially start proliferating everything. Proliferation is really efficient. However, it's only efficient if you are actually proliferating everything and you make sure that you keep your proliferation up and running. With robots shooting parts of your factory potentially to pieces, I'm not entirely sure I can do that. So I don't want to be reliant on something that might not actually be functioning the entire time. It's just a personal choice. Nothing wrong with proliferation. I've made quite a few videos about that's actually explaining why proliferation is super efficient. I just don't want it in my combat update initially. Of course, those rockets are not going to be of any use if we can't get them in the air, so I've built this little launching facility over here. Now, I used to make this all around the planet. You can still do that. I just opted to make a half planet design. If I ever want the other half as well, you can just copy and paste it on the other side as well. But honestly, with the enormous cost of rockets, you're not going to be mass producing them at any time, so you might as well just keep it as they are right now. Yeah, all we need to do now is actually bring in the rockets and start building a Dyson Sphere. Now, when it comes to a Dyson Sphere, there's not really a right or wrong way to go about it, but I prefer starting with a tiny little sphere like this. This is actually not a sphere, it's just a little solar cell type of thing, but then a very large version of that. The reason I'm starting out really small is because this will actually allow my rockets to start building this. You can see the first rockets coming in. Looks so cool. Make sure this actually gets populated with my cells. That's actually a very, very slow and tedious process. Honestly, my least favorite part about the game. I like the end result, I just don't like the tedious, slow process that goes before that. And if you start out small, it's just a lot more efficient to actually build this part, and then once this is more or less finished, you can start adding new parts to that. That means it's just nice to look at. If you start building a large sphere straight away, you can do that. Again, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it will take forever to be completed, and you'll just have this monster of a half-built sphere out there for a very long time. It kind of looks like the Death Star usually from Star Wars, half-built, not completed, for hours and hours and hours. While your sphere is building, start optimizing all the production you have on your planet. So make sure you have enough raw resources coming in. Check that. Just check the ILS if they are actually receiving enough raw resources. Check what your bottlenecks are. Build some more production of whatever you need. If you find that, for example, your processors are not going to the correct place, build some dedicated belts in order to fix that problem. In this case, I'm building a processor build that's connected directly to my purple resource, because as you can see, all my processors were going to other places like I already predicted. So this will solve that part of the problem. Make sure you have all the other sciences in production as well. As you can see, that's actually going pretty well. We have green science completely up and running here. We are making some decent amount of warpers. Blue and red science is in production, but we already capped out on those. The yellow science is doing what it needs to, and as you can see now, my purple science is starting up again as well, because I will be getting in quite a bit of processors.
Okay, so a few hours later, this initial part of the sphere has been almost completed. As you can see, it just needs some more seals to be absorbed. My entire swarm was actually absorbed into the sphere. I might actually need to duplicate the real launchers on the second planet as well, because as you can see, it's absorbing faster than them. I can actually shoot them in the air. And what I really like to do is kind of build this ring-like type of Dyson Sphere. Again, personal preference, but the nice thing about this is it doesn't look that weird once you're still building it. And with the initial section being done, yeah, I just like the way how it looks, even though it might still be filling in. Would you look at that? Doesn't that just look awesome? I really like how you can fly through this, and the sphere actually parts in front of your Icarus as well. I really like that both sides of the sphere look completely different. And look at all that activity now in our space around our planets. Oh man, this game is so beautiful. And with that, we've come to the end of this episode and this particular series. Now, as you can see, I did add in quite a few more facilities to just optimize the production that I already have. Everything is still on a single planet. You can easily put some mining facilities and things like that if you want on the mining planets themselves. The smelting facilities, I mean, it's a fairly efficient way of doing that. So you can see I have all the production I need to build a Dyson Sphere fairly efficiently at this point. We have all the different colors of research up and running. Even though I don't see the green one yet, we do have it in production over here, so should be in here somewhere. I'm finishing up basically at this point the last few colored research, and then all we need to do is switch these from the actual research into the white science production, then add in a few of these towers to use that white science to put it into actual new technology, and then we can go straight into the end game at this point. I'm not going to do that in this particular series because the combat update is going to come out pretty soon. I'm going to make a video on the combat update to kind of give you the latest update on all the information that we have. And if you want to see that, of course, make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. In the meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed this one. If there's anything you feel like I've left out, if you have any questions about this particular playstyle and stuff like that, make sure you leave a comment, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.